Hi everybody, my name is John. I'm one of the recovery coaches here on ehab.care, and today I want to start a workshop, more than a lecture, on denial. Chances are you've had this word thrown at you a lot, to the point of where maybe you've even stopped hearing it or stopped listening to it. In the treatment center where I used to work, Bethesda Addiction Treatment Center, this is a regular workshop that I would do with clients. And the way I would start it there is I would ask them a question. Is denial a good thing or a bad thing? And the reason I ask that question is to try and gauge where people are at in their understanding of what denial is. And almost every case, bar none, you would get a dictionary, Wikipedia, intellectual interpretation or answer to what denial is. And some would say it's good, some say it's bad. Now, in my experience working with people that are addicted in the last 15 or so years, is people think they understand what denial means in a addiction context, or just in any context. Because they have an intellectual understanding, a base intellectual understanding of what denial is, they believe that they understand it, and it's not something that they really need to focus too much on, and they get busy with other stuff. And there's a section in the step 1, the NA step working guide. I think it's the second section after the introductory questions. It's the second or third section. It's on denial. And again, listening to a step work over the many years, taking people through, the step work program, I noticed early that people don't really get what the questions are trying to answer them, and almost all the time, the answers that clients would come up with in their step work were very basic, very intellectual. There's a standard blueprint that gets taught in many rehabs and in many circles. Rationalizing, justifying, blaming, comparing. Those are the 4 big ones, and these are all relevant. And there's a few surface examples that will get shared in the step work. There is a difference between denial and denial in the context of addictions. And the purpose of this workshop is to help you to develop a much deeper understanding and self-awareness of how denial works in your life. Okay? So we're going to look at what is it and where does it come from. So outside of an addiction context, denial is actually a good thing more often than not. It's a coping mechanism. It's a defense mechanism that comes out of your subconscious. Usually around, pushed the wrong button there. Usually around some sort of trauma. Okay? It's an involuntary, unconscious defense mechanism. I'm going to use a personal story to illustrate what I mean. In the last days of my addiction, I took my father on. My father was a very gentle man, a very kind, a very warm man, I never involved my family in my addiction, other than I just absconded, disappeared. They never knew where I was or what was happening. But in those last days, when I was really desperate and I was living on the streets and I exhausted all other avenues, I took my father on to get money. And I used fear of my safety as a way to get money out of him. And my father was actually quite savvy, and I'm not sure how he found out or how he figured it out, but he found out that I was on the run from the law, that there were a whole bunch of warrants out to me. I'd absconded on a whole bunch of court cases. I'd been caught in possession and with firearms, and so I was a wanted man. My father found this all out, and he cut me off. But I knew that it had hurt him very deeply. And in those early months of being clean, this was something that was weighing very heavy on my mind. The guilt I was feeling was immense. And I was about 5 or 6 months into being clean, or away from the last time I used, maybe 8 months, with the guilt of what I'd done to my father very, very heavy on my heart and soul. I was building up the courage to make a phone call and to get hold of my dad and to try and make some sort of amends or say sorry or take away the guilt. Not a great motive for wanting to do anything. Guilt is not a good motivator. But as I was about to make that phone call, I found out from my pastor that my father had died of a massive heart attack. And this pastor was where I was. He was looking after me. I was in a big homeless shelter called the Ark in Cape Town. I was by this time under correctional supervision because I'd gone to the courts, I'd handed myself in, I was in a legal process. I'd been convicted of one of the charges. I was put under 2 years house arrest under Pastor Brian's care in the Ark. So anyway, Pastor Brian, he let me know my father had just died, and I felt nothing. And I noticed that. I thought, that's a bit weird. So I got permission to go to Johannesburg, to go to his funeral. I went to his funeral, and people from all over the world there. It was a beautiful funeral, lots of bagpipes, very emotive. And I was sitting in the church there and felt nothing. And I noticed that too. And I thought, what kind of terrible person am I that I can't feel anything? I just don't care. Maybe I just don't care. What's wrong with me? There's something wrong with me. And I came back to the Ark in Cape Town and carried on my life in there under house arrest under Pastor Brian's care. And this, again, something that weighed heavily on my mind, like, why don't I feel anything? Fast forward to about 6 years away from the last time I used. I'd met Colin Garnett, and Colin had started to sponsor me and mentor me, and he'd got me into AA and NA. Got me into doing 12-step therapy. I was attending groups at this rehab called Beth Rafa where Colin worked. I was in a therapeutic process. And one night, sitting at home on my own, watching a movie called Billy Elliot, towards the end of the movie, there's a scene where the father and the son are sitting on a low wooden fence, in a paddock, and they tumble off the back of this fence, play fighting with each other. And the grief for my father erupted out of me. It was, right out of my diaphragm, like a and I just wept and wept and wept and let all of this feeling and all of this grief pour out of me. Snot and tears. And I could remember in the groups that I was tending with Colin at Beth Rafa, they were saying, let the feelings happen, lean into the feelings, don't suppress them, don't avoid them, let them happen. So I had that narrative in my head, and I just let it happen. So 6 years later, let's say, I got in touch with that grief. So what happened there? Denial is what happened there. In those early days, there was no way I would have been, looking back now with hindsight and with the recovery and the wisdom and the knowledge I have now, and if I reflect back on that time, the intensity of pain that I experienced in that moment when the grief finally came out of me, when the denial released those feelings, had that happened to me back then, I would never have been able to cope with that. I'm pretty sure I would have relapsed, and I would have been using within the day. Okay? So in this instance, denial, definitely a good thing, definitely protected me. Okay? And you can see on the one sticker over there, denial is a shock absorber for the soul. It protects us until we are equipped to cope with reality. A quote from C.S. Lewis. This was definitely true for me in this instance. So let's look at a dictionary definition. There's lots. I've Googled them, and there's many. Denial. What's wrong with me today? Denial is the psychological process by which human beings protect themselves from things which threaten them by blocking knowledge of those things from their awareness. It is a defense which distorts reality. It keeps us from feeling the pain and uncomfortable truth about things we do not want to face. If we cannot feel or see the consequences of our actions, then everything is fine and we can continue to live without making any changes. And I think that fits for this instance of denial. So this begs the question then, why is it so deadly for addicts and alcoholics? Because it is. And I think because there's a significant threat and a subsequent fear of loss. And what is that loss? So I'm going to introduce another definition that I heard in those days when I was going to Beth Rafa. I'm not sure exactly where or who I heard it from. I think it might have been Colin. But there was a definition of addiction that I heard that resonated with me more than any other. Okay? And it sounds like this. Definition. What? Addiction is a very intense and passionate, personal relationship/love affair with a substance and its subsequent culture based on false senses of love and security and belonging. Okay? So this is a relationship. We're in a relationship with this thing. Addiction. Whatever that means for you. For me, it was a whole bunch of things. It was crack cocaine, it was alcohol, it was sex, it was affirmation, it was love, it was weed, it was a lot of things. But the addiction itself was something that I was in a very, very personal relationship with, stroke love affair. It was my best friend. It was my confidant. It's where I went when I felt sad. It's where I went when I felt happy. I thought about it all the time. I went to sleep thinking about it. I woke up thinking about it. Much of my day, my thinking, my time, my energy, my ingenuity, my creativity was dedicated to this. All day, every day, day after day. The obsession, the compulsion was extreme. It's a higher power. Okay? Now, another question I ask the clients at the rehab is, how many of you have been through an intensely painful breakup? Okay? And on a scale of 1 to 10, what was the pain like? Like 1, not so much, 10, like one of the worst pains I've ever experienced. And almost always it's 10. So now let's put that in this context. If we're in a relationship with this thing, any other relationship we have or have had pales into insignificance compared to the intensity of the relationship I have with this thing. I hear clients say that the clients that have children, the children are the most important thing in my life. They're the center of my universe. And I always correct them and say that's rubbish. They're not. Or I hear people say, my wife or my husband or my boyfriend or my girlfriend, or they've got other relationships in their life which are the most important relationship they have, and they can't lose this relationship. And it means everything to them. It's the center of their world. And I have to correct them and I say, that's nonsense. That's not the most important relationship in your life. That relationship is insignificant compared to this relationship you have with this thing. You put this relationship with this thing before any other relationship. What you're actually saying is that you wish your other relationships were as important as this relationship, but they're not. You put this relationship first. And if you want any evidence of that, why are you sitting in a treatment center and these other people that you claim are the center of your universe sitting at home, broken and bleeding, with shattered hope, shattered dreams, shattered lives? So the threat and subsequent fear of loss of this relationship is immense. And the addiction takes that involuntary, unconscious defense mechanism and adapts it into protecting this relationship with the thing, with this addiction. So where denial normally would probably, where is mostly a passive and a protective coping mechanism, the denial then adapts and becomes an offensive defensive defense mechanism. It wants to protect this relationship. It wants to protect this at all costs. And as addicts and alcoholics, we then start to adapt and develop a myriad of different ways, different defense mechanisms that we can use to protect the relationship. Okay? And this is what is so key for us to understand and start developing insight and awareness. So, I think there's going to be maybe another 2 or 3 parts where we're going to go and unpack and look at actual defense mechanisms to help you to start broadening your perception and your awareness and understanding of what denial is. Because it's something that you have to understand and conceptualize and personalize in your own recovery process. Because if you just skim past this because you think you understand it, many of those denial mechanisms are going to stay alive and active in your life. Any denial mechanisms that you identify, you're not going to be able to use them again because it's no longer subconscious. Okay? So stay tuned, stay with me, and we'll go into part 2.